kind of think of investigators as an architect, like of the process. So if you're building a building as an architect, you want to put in ramps from the start, you want to put in braille, you want to put in handles, you want to add features from the beginning that can benefit a wide range of people.
Welcome to the Investigator Chronicles, where we profile the practice of someone conducting investigations, either in the workplace or elsewhere, or sometimes folks whose work relates to investigation practice. But today, I'm joined by Rupa Karyampudi, who is a workplace investigator, an independent workplace investigator, and one of the founding partners of Prisma Workplace Legal LLP. That's an Ontario-based firm that conducts investigations in both English and French. Rupa herself conducts workplace and institutional investigations into a range of issues, including discrimination, harassment, and misconduct. Welcome, Rupa.
Thanks, Christine. Really glad to be here.
So maybe why don't we start with you just telling me a little bit about yourself? Like, did you set out to do this particular type of work?
So initially, no. I actually started out in litigation, in disability and employment litigation, and I did that for many, many years, like over 10 years. And it was over COVID, when I also started teaching part-time at University of Ottawa Law School. I taught a course on social justice, and I really enjoyed like the subject matter and kind of thinking a bit more about my career. And I really wanted to do something more human rights focused. Came across investigations, and I thought it would be like a natural fit. That's kind of how I got into this line of work.
And so, other than your mind kind of wandering during COVID, what was it about this work specifically that attracted you to it?
Yeah, so I think it had a lot of the elements of litigation that I actually enjoyed without some of the elements that I didn't enjoy as much. So I could use some of the same skills. So, interviewing people, um, writing. I love the writing portion of litigation, but just kind of less of the adversarial aspect of it, which I felt didn't suit my personality as much. I was drawn to being more in a neutral role. And then now that I've been doing it for a while, I think it was a natural fit with my personality. Like I love, the evidence, like the puzzle piece kind of aspect of it, putting all the evidence together and meeting different types of people, and just it's meaningful work. So I do, I'm glad that I'm able to contribute to safer and more respectful workplaces.
That's amazing. You're probably, I feel like, among the rarefied people that likes to write reports. So I hope we'll have a chance to come back to that. So when you were starting this work, this is a question I love to ask, is there a piece of advice that you wish somebody had given to you when you were just starting out that would have helped you with the work?
Um, I think a piece of advice that would have helped me and that I would give to, people who might be nervous doing this work is to remember that it's a standard of reasonableness and not correctness. Because I think when I first started out, I had so much pressure to like get it right. And that was like a lot of pressure, when you're first starting out. So I think just remembering that it's reasonableness, you need to follow like a fair process. You need to explain your process, explain, how you came to your findings, and that's kind of the more important part, and but then getting it like quote unquote right. So that's kind of what I wish someone had told me when I first started.
Yeah, it's good. It's a good reminder, isn't it? Because it really can feel like a lot when you're just starting out. Yeah. So I wanted to maybe draw on your litigation background and how it is that you made that transition. Um, so how would you say that that work informed or informs the investigation work that you do?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, I was really focused on disability litigation. So I think that really helped me in terms of the types of clients that I was working with. which are, people with disabilities, people who are neurodiverse, and it really helped me to understand some of the challenges that some of these folks had in terms of, engaging with the legal process, whether it's, communication or like processing difficulties. It really, really helped me kind of understand practically the challenges there, and like what kind of barriers that exist in the legal process. And so I think I took that with me, like from litigation, but like to investigation process as well. Also, the teaching element also kind of helped me create a lens or a frame in which I could kind of understand some of these challenges. So I always talk about the social model of disability, which is disability not being about the person's condition as much, but more about the systems and the environments that are designed that kind of create the challenges. So it really made me look at differences rather than deficiencies. And that kind of came to frame how I approach my investigation work. Um, and I can talk a bit more about that if you'd
Yeah, I
like.
was going to say, if you kind of imagine investigation work maybe itself as a system, how do you approach it in a way that kind of applies some of those principles?
Yeah, so I really focused on what's called universal design, which is designing for kind of a broader range of people from the very start. So there's like a concept in universal design, which is, building a ramp is a pathway for many. So really what that means is if you build in a feature to a system or even a product, um, it's meant initially to benefit someone with disability or someone who's neurodiverse, but actually it can benefit everyone and just like a very broad range of people. So, an example is a cut crease that you see in the sidewalk, which is initially put there for people who use wheelchairs, but of course, it can be used by so many different people, people pushing strollers, people, on scooters, people who maybe have a wheelie bag. So, it has like a much broader implication for just the wider public. And another example is like closed captions on TV, meant for those who are hearing impaired or hard of hearing, but can benefit maybe someone who has ADHD who has a difficulty focusing, or just anyone really. I mean, I know a lot of people like to put on closed captions, so it just has a universal benefit. So that's kind of why it's called like universal design. So it's more intentional and less reactive. And I really try to apply those principles into my process. And I kind of think of investigators as an architect, like of the process. So if you're building a building as an architect, you want to put in ramps from the start. You want to put in braille. You want to put in, handles. You want to make it. You want to add features from the beginning that can benefit a wide range of people.
So it's a really interesting concept, right? To imagine as a workplace investigator to think of yourself as an architect of the process. So can we dig into that a little bit and maybe tell me
Absolutely.
as you are thinking about your process and how you can become the architect of it in a way that makes it more accessible to folks. What kinds of things, like maybe some examples of things that you've done, sort of like the examples that you've given, but in the investigation
Yeah,
context?
absolutely. And I mean, I do think of it in a layered approach. So I have the first layer, which I was kind of talking about, which is like the universal design principles. So like features that I put in from the start. But I also do have that second layer, which is individual supports for, specific needs that someone might identify. But when it comes to like the general universal design layer, like that first base layer, I really focus on communication. So I would say communication is key. Um, just using very plain language, avoiding kind of legalistic language. And I start out with a very detailed process letter for all my participants, and it's written in plain language. It is written in a very accessible font with lots of white space, headings, bullet points, just so it's very easy to read and so the person can really understand the process. And I feel that reduces a lot of anxiety, a lot of questions, hopefully encourages better participation. And also, if someone doesn't know what the process is, it's really difficult for them to maybe request the more individual supports that they might need. So I think that really helps. Often I'll do an intro call with people like before the interview, so like a little pre-interview call, just if, especially if they have more specific supports that they need. Um, and an example of that could be, for example, interview format. So, most interviews these days I do conduct virtually, but if someone finds screens difficult or if they have sensory issues or they might find reading, social cues difficult on a screen, then I might, accommodate that and have like an in-person interview. So those are just, some kind of examples in terms of that first layer and then also that second layer.
Does your introductory letter invite some of those more specific requests? Like, do you find that people would ask on their own, or are you taking the initiative to draw out those requests?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I know I've thought about it quite a bit.
Mm.
So I do invite, but I do it in a way that's maybe a little bit more inclusive. So instead of just saying, do you need an accommodation? I'll word it in a way like, is there anything that would help you to participate in the process? And there's a couple of reasons why I've done this. First of all, I feel that, well, I've learned that there's a lot of people that don't feel comfortable disclosing that they have a disability or are neurodivergent for a number of reasons. Um, there's also many people who I've learned have been undiagnosed as neurodivergent until they're much older. So some people might be engaging with the process who may not be diagnosed. And I feel this just accounts for people who just process information differently and just might need supports without labeling it as an accommodation.
Right, right. So that makes complete sense that people might not have that language around. They might not have that language because they don't kind of consider themselves or label themselves that way, and other folks who do just may not be comfortable necessarily identifying that, especially so early, well, in this process period, but much less so early in the process.
Yes, yeah. And I think it just kind of, again, goes back to the universal design and just trying to make it more broad to include like a broader range of participants.
Yeah. So some of the things that you're describing, and I think just even as you talk about this generally, I feel like it's language that we often hear in the context today of employing a trauma-informed approach. Like, do you find that people do they ask you if this is really what we're talking about here, or is this somehow different?
Yeah. I feel there's a lot of overlap. There's definitely a lot of overlap with the trauma-informed approach. I think it's really the lens that I'm applying. So I'm applying more of a like a disability and neurodiversity lens, and it's a little bit broader. So, um, what I'm talking about in terms of universal design would include those who've experienced trauma, but also people who are neurodiverse, people who have processing differences, people, it could also apply to people whose English is not their first language or cultural differences. So I feel like it just supports like a broader range of participants, but it is the same goal as the trauma-informed approach. So it's better participation. And of course, hopefully that leads to better evidence for us as investigators.
So you talked about communication and some of those or I guess early in the investigation engagements or contact. So let's talk about the investigation itself. So once you get into the investigation, are there things that you're also doing there, or maybe things people are requesting to help them participate more fully?
Uh, yes. So I think one thing that I've learned, conducting interviews in particular, is that people have very different styles of communication and different um, abilities, like to or differences in processing. So it really has forced me to kind of adjust and to kind of check my own bias, I would say, when
Mm-hmm.
I'm conducting interviews. So I guess I'll give you an example. I know most investigators are taught to start very broadly with their questions and kind of work like more narrower. So kind of the funnel method. So start very broadly,
Yeah.
tell me what happened. And then the person will, tell you the story and then you might ask some follow-ups. I've learned that that can be very overwhelming for certain individuals. particularly those who are neurodivergent or have certain disabilities, and that the funnel method is not always the best way for those individuals because it can be so overwhelming for them, and they might start offering up like too many details, go off on tangents. So in that case, I've learned to be um, just to adjust and maybe start further down the funnel and ask some more targeted questions. So maybe some guideposts like, where did the incident happen? Like what happened right before? Just a bit, not still open-ended, but just kind of further down that funnel, a bit more targeted, I found can lead to like better answers. So that's like one example in terms of like the interview.
And I guess you don't know as you start an interview what's going to work best for somebody. So do you just come prepared for adjusting as needed? Is that kind of the approach?
Yeah, yeah, I do. Like when I have my like written, I don't write out questions, but I do have my topics. And I will have kind of the narrower questions like written down. So if the broad question is not giving me an answer that I can work with, then I will just kind of move down like on my answers and kind of move down into the more narrow questions to kind of reorient. So yeah, you just have to be very prepared, I would say, to like pivot in the
Right.
moment.
Do you ever find yourself, just as you're describing it, I'm wondering, do you find yourself kind of on that precipice of, I want to ask this question, I think it'll be helpful, but it's leading. What do I do?
Yeah, yeah. That is a good question. Yeah, I think again, I would try to move down the funnel. So you're right. Like you might get so far down that it's like more into leading, but um, this would be after trying a few times. Obviously, if you
Right.
notice it's not yielding results, you'll have to kind of move down. I would say like you want to get the best evidence at the end of the day, and while leading questions are not ideal, if people have different ways of processing information, it also might not be ideal to ask broad questions.
Right. Right. So you're kind of making that judgment call about if I have to formulate my question this way, at least I get evidence, and then I can decide how I'm going to weigh that evidence
Exactly.
ultimately.
Exactly. Exactly. That's right.
So one of the questions that comes up in the discourse around a trauma-informed investigation is about how to assess credibility. And I'm wondering if you've ever faced that when you've done investigations involving persons with disabilities.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there is a lot of overlap with how I look at it when it comes like to this trauma-informed approach, because, disability or neurodiversity, it can affect how someone presents, communicates, recalls information. So there's definitely like a lot of overlap there, and I think you can use a lot of those principles when like making credibility assessments or determining credibility when it comes to, people with disabilities. Um, I think there is a risk here, as there is with the trauma-informed approach, to be influenced by demeanor. That's why, you know, I don't use demeanor to do credibility assessments because it can be influenced by so many things, including trauma, including disability, neurodivergence, and there's so many differences in how people present. So I'll give you some examples specific to
Mm,
those with
right.
disabilities or neurodivergence. So um, they could have difficulty maintaining eye contact. So they might be like looking around, they might appear distracted. Um, on the other hand, they could make like really intense eye contact, and that could be indication of masking. So maybe they've been told that like, they don't make good eye contact, so they're like staring very intensely to mask. So that could be an example. There could be fidgeting. There could be like a flat effect, even when describing something that appears to be traumatic. So I think it's really important as an investigator to remind yourself that like assumption is a risk and just it's really risky to make assumptions based on demeanor. And you have to like slow yourself down and kind of focus on the substance of what is being said and kind of check your own bias, as I mentioned, because I think we innately have we can make these assumptions, right? So I think it's just really important to kind of really slow down yourself. Um, and like in the trauma-informed approach, I try to focus on the core elements. So make sure if you notice inconsistencies, are those inconsistencies in the core elements or like the peripheral elements? So that's kind of what you're looking for more so, and not on demeanor or how the person presents.
Well, and I love that you've distinguished between demeanor and taking demeanor into account, but also bias, because I think intellectually, a lot of investigators might say, of course, I would never take into account demeanor because I'm not going to write that in my report, but don't pay enough attention to how am I receiving this evidence? How is it coming across to me? Because that can so much guide the rest of your investigation, and you can end up going down kind of a path of bias without even really appreciating it.
Yeah, absolutely, which is why I think it is important to kind of consider all the different possibilities. Like even if someone didn't disclose to you that, they have a disability or neurodivergence, I think it's important to recognize that there could be other factors here.
Yeah, then that's a great point because we can be encountering just in the same way trauma. We don't always know that people have had a traumatic experience or that's been their response to something similarly. So just to keep that in mind. Yeah. What about in other parts of the investigation? So I'm thinking here about probably one of the most difficult things I feel like I've done is when I have collected evidence in the investigation that contradicts what one of the parties has told me, and I've got to present that back to them. And I'm anticipating how they're going to receive that. It's going to be difficult to hear. Uh, that just comes to my mind. Is there anything special that you might do in that circumstance, or anything? Does the concept of universal design and some of the things you're talking about apply there too?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's difficult no matter what the circumstance. But I have built in a few features like into my process to account for differences. Um, First of all, it goes back to communication. So I set up expectations really early. So I do mention in my process letter that there might be, follow-up
Oh,
interviews.
right at the
Like,
beginning.
aware.
Amazing.
Yeah, I do. And even at the end of my initial interview, when I'm kind of wrapping it up, I'll say, I might call you in for a follow-up interview. That interview will be very different from this interview. In that interview, I'll be, presenting you with, evidence that I've collected during the investigation, and it's an opportunity for you to respond to that. So I really do kind of present it as an opportunity for them, which I mean, it's part of procedural fairness. So I make sure to say this is an opportunity for you. And then when I'm scheduling the follow-up, in the email, I will give them a heads up in terms of the type of evidence that I might be presenting, especially if it's like visual or audio. So if it's like video, photos, text, like private text messages, emails, things like that, I might just put in the email like, oh, I've gathered some photos in the process of this investigation that I would like to give you an opportunity to respond to, something like that. Just so they kind of have a heads up as the type of evidence that is going to be shown. And then again, I reiterate at the beginning of the interview, like, I'm going to show you these images or I'm going to show you these text messages. Um, and then even right before I show it to them, I'll again check in, say, is it okay if I show this to you? And I think that's to account for many differences that people have difficulty processing, but also trauma as well. So I find that works quite well. And then I'm mindful of pacing as well. So I give them time to review. I allow pauses to allow them to reflect and process, and not kind of like rush them.
Yeah, I think those are such great ideas, and sometimes in the interests of conducting that timely investigation, we can be inclined to try to go fast and rush and get interviews over with, but this is a real opportunity to make it more accessible for people.
Yeah. And I think as investigators, we can be uncomfortable with silence and we just kind of want to jump in. But I think it's important to kind of like let it breathe a little bit.
Is there Do you ever encounter, and I'm curious if it makes a difference if this request comes from, say, counsel to one of the parties, but a request to do something that's not part of your standard process. And the thing that's jumping to my mind is somebody who says, I don't want to do an interview. I only want to answer questions in writing or something along those lines. Maybe you have a different example.
Yeah, no, I have gotten those types of requests before. I would say a very common one. That's a common one. And typically I try to explain that it's a conversation. And I could really benefit from hearing from, the individual directly. And if they have something to give me in writing as well, I'm happy to review that as well. But, it is a conversation and I do have to ask follow-up questions, which would be quite cumbersome if we do that in writing. And then another one I get often is questions in writing in advance.
Oh, right. Before the
And
interview. So you're
before
doing
the
the interview, but I want the questions ahead of time.
Yeah, which again, I kind of reiterate it's a conversation. So, and again, as I mentioned earlier, I don't really write out my questions or write out topics. So I might um I might accommodate that one depending on the file. So if there's any risk of evidence being destroyed or collusion or anything like that, I might think twice. But if there isn't kind of any evidence that that might happen, then I that is something that I might provide because it help people in terms of organizing their thoughts, and just memory. And I usually try to do it for both parties. So if I get a request for one
Great
party, I'll
point.
do the other party unless they provide like a medical evidence.
Right. Right. So you've got that kind of parallel fairness on both sides.
Yeah,
Okay, I feel like there's so much more we could talk about, but
that's right. I know.
we're coming toward the end. So we've got some standard questions that we love to ask people. So first one, this is our lightning round. First question is, if you could name a fictional character who you think would make or would have made a great workplace investigator.
Okay, so when I first heard your question, the the first person that jumped into my mind was Sherlock Holmes because I'm a huge Sherlock Holmes fan. Like I've read the
Okay.
books, I've seen all the different adaptations, but I don't think he would make a good workplace investigator because his people skills are not the best. But I think
Fair.
Dr. Watson would make an excellent workplace
Ah,
investigator because he's very observant and like empathetic, great writer, good
yeah,
with
he's got all
people. So
he's got, he's got Sherlock Holmes in his back pocket, so he
yeah,
can he
he's the
can
one who
guide it.
writes the stories, right? So I think he would be a really good, and he works with someone who I think Sherlock Holmes is likely neurodivergent, so he's good at working with different types of people as well. So
Yes, yes, that's a very good observation, I think. Um, do you have any resources that you might share with our viewers that it doesn't have to be a workplace investigation resource, but like a book or something that has helped your practice?
yeah, there's a book that I do recommend to a lot of people, and it's a classic business book. It has a cheesy title, but it's How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale
Sure, Dale
Carnegie.
Carnegie. Yeah.
Yeah, and I read it when I was very young, like maybe in my early 20s when I first started like getting into my career, and I found it's a very helpful, like just a career book. It's just a great book on communication. So I find it really helps me communicate with different people. So whether it's participants, whether it's my clients, just building a practice, like I just think it has some just like time tested truths in there
Like
that
a reason why they're classics, right?
exactly it's classic.
Amazing. Okay, well, I asked you at the beginning if there was a piece of advice that you wished you'd had. So now I'm going to turn the tables and say, do you have a piece of advice that you might give to that investigator who's just starting out?
Yeah. I would say stay curious and stay open. I think that's like the number one thing as an investigator, whether that's in your investigation, so not assuming, as I mentioned, just avoiding confirmation bias, but also in your career, just to like keep learning, advancing your skills, checking your own bias. Like it's such an ongoing part of the work.
That's great. Thank you so much, Rupa Karyampudi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. And to all of you who've been listening, thank you again for joining us for another Investigator Chronicles. And we'll look forward to seeing you all hopefully next time.